The Dartmouth Heritage Museum wishes to recognize that we exist and operate on Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The Mi'kmaq have long been the traditional custodians of this land, and the Dartmouth Heritage Museum Society would like to pay respects to the elders both past and present of the Mi'kmaq Nation. The Mi'kmaq name for what we now call Dartmouth is Bunamugwadi. Welcome to Evergreen House, a house with history spanning from the Confederation of Canada. The house is located on Newcastle Street in Dartmouth, situated between Alderney and Southdale with a view of the Dartmouth Cove. The Evergreen gives you a personal look of life before Dartmouth became a city. Open hours may vary during different times of the season, so be sure to check our website to know when you can come visit us. Evergreen House was completed in 1867 after lawyer and later judge Alexander James commissioned famed local architect Henry Elliott with the project. But good things don't begin without tragedy. Alexander James and his wife Harriet Hawthorne lost 8 of their 11 children to disease, and they moved to Dartmouth to get out of the unsanitary conditions of downtown. Halifax had a long stretch of epidemics due to the city's dense residential conditions. But at that time, Dartmouth was still considered a rural community. Over the years since its completion, the Evergreen House has picked up its share of famous figures and stories to be known. So why don't we go inside and take a look at the Red Parlor? Easily the most elegant of all the rooms, this parlor details the lives of a Victorian Dartmouth living space, with details on the lives of the remaining James children and artifacts from the era preserved. The Green Parlor takes a look at the house's architecture after the James family left and views examples from the museum's fine art collection. The Evergreen House was later home to nationally acclaimed Nova Scotia folklorist Dr. Helen Crichton. In 1928, Helen began collecting folklore of the Maritime provinces and would enjoy a career that brought her international recognition and earned her the title Canada's First Lady of Folklore. She had written many books about the things she collected over the years, the best known being Bluenose Ghosts, that continues to be a Canadian bestseller. She collected many stories, beliefs, superstitions, cures, folkways, and even songs, like Farewell to Nova Scotia.
Farewell to Nova Scotia, the sea-bound coast, let your mountains dark and dreary be.
Helen Crichton sold the Evergreen House to the City of Dartmouth in 1978, who purchased it with support of the Nova Scotia Museum. Joseph Howe was a champion of the Nova Scotia citizen, working tirelessly to guarantee freedom of the press and representation in a responsible government. Though Howe was Haligonian by birth, he lived in Dartmouth between 1863 and 1873, corresponding with some of the most important events of his life, including his battle against Nova Scotia's entry in Confederation. While living in Dartmouth, Howe made frequent visits to his friend Alexander James at Evergreen House. Although it's called the Halifax Explosion, the 6,000 residents of Dartmouth experienced it as well. But there was one thing that remained consistent: the running of ferries. The ferry was making a crossing when the explosion occurred and continued despite being heavily damaged by the blast and facing the subsequent tidal wave. The ferry was a critical link between the two cities during the relief and recovery efforts. Let's discover another house with history that stretches even longer than that of the Evergreen. Across from Quaker's Landing, down Ochterlony Street, the Quaker House lies and has remained since 1786. In 1971, a surge of urban renewal resulted in the destruction of many historic homes in Dartmouth's downtown core. The Museum Society preserved Quaker House and converted it to an interpreted historic house open to the public every summer. Originally the home of William Ray, the house is considered the oldest standing structure in Dartmouth. It's a municipally and provincially registered historic site and is representative of its construction period and reflective of the Nantucket Island domestic architecture from which it's derived. During the American Revolutionary War, the British government placed high tariffs on goods from the United States. The high rates were a particular problem for Quaker whalers, as Britain was their largest whale oil market. Since Nova Scotia was a British colony, trade with Great Britain would not have the same high tariffs as the United States, so the first wave of Quaker whalers from Nantucket settled in Dartmouth in 1785. The Dartmouth whaling fleet rapidly expanded and became the rival of every whaling center in the world. The practice was seen as both profitable and immoral for innovation, which came with its share of perils. Since the house was acquired by the Heritage Museum, they have preserved artifacts and trinkets made of different whale product like bone and baleen. During the Industrial Revolution, whaling is comparative to the modern-day petroleum industry, lubricating the machines that kept the industries moving and fueling many lanterns in the Western world. The summer kitchen wasn't always here. The Ray family used this area as a kitchen during the warmer months. The Jackson family later expanded it to become the traditional kitchen of the household. In the 18th century, like many settlers, Quakers lived off bread, root vegetables, soups, and stews. The Ray family would spend hours milking their cows and churning butter. The summer kitchen is a place that has been preserved to give you an up-close and personal look into what cooking and kitchen architecture in the 1700s looked like. When William Ray built this house in 1786, he and his family only lived here for 5 years before moving to England. The house had many owners over the next 50 years until its purchase by John Tracy and his wife Mary Jane Jackson in 1846. The house stayed in the Jackson family over the next 120 years. The Mi'kmaq people who had been living here for centuries traveled the waterways and fished in Jabukduk, now known as the Halifax Harbor. They had a friendly relationship with the Quakers. On the second floor of the house, there's one of few bedrooms, but the children's room tells the story of the Ray family's children and how ordinary life looked like for young people before modernization. They were expected to watch over each other, do homework, read, and play. It was also common practice that siblings shared beds to save on space and heat. The Dartmouth Room explores transportation and first responders. From the Shubenacadie Canal to the ferry service and shipbuilding, transportation was an early factor in Dartmouth's success as a community. Dartmouth was incorporated as a town in 1873. The Dartmouth Engine Company of 1822 was one of the earliest fire departments in North America, second only to the one in Halifax. The Union Protection Group was a volunteer group founded in 1876. Separate from the fire department, they helped protect families and properties in times of disaster by assisting firefighters in protecting the personal effects and homes of the victims. And the Shubenacadie Canal was an essential part for providing water to the town of Dartmouth for years to come. The Dartmouth Heritage Society is obliged to ensure the preservation of Dartmouth's history, as seen by the houses, but the artifacts kept and restored tell their own stories too. Between the 1860s and into the 1910s, mustaches were a sign of strong masculinity, especially within England. Men would use dyes and waxes to assist with the look of their mustaches. The downside of this is when drinking tea, the hot liquid would often melt the wax and cause it to affect both drink and facial hair. To avoid this, mustache cups became popular. This cup in particular is also considered a sentimental cup, as it has the phrase, "Think of me," written on the front. The moss rose motif was popular in Canada during the Victorian era. The moss rose flower was distinguishable from the mossiness surrounding the buds of the flower. French potters used variations on the theme over the years. While French porcelain was preferred, it was often expensive, and cheaper alternatives were bought that bore no maker's mark. This handheld fire screen would be used to protect women from the heat of a fireplace during the Victorian era. Larger screens were also used. During that era, it was unfashionable to have a tan or reddish complexion or even freckles. Makeup helped ensure a paler look, but it was often heavy and could end up melting if too close to heat. Therefore, these fire screens helped prevent this. This was one of Dr. Helen Crichton's typewriters, which she used to write her various books on folk music and folklore. This is a top hat that once belonged to Joseph Howe. It's made of brushed black silk and was manufactured for Coleman & Co. that was located on Granville Street in Halifax. A handcrafted harpoon remains on display as a look at the tool that fueled a short-lived but influential industry in Dartmouth. Joseph Finley was a part of the Dartmouth Engine Company, which was one of the fire departments in the town. This helmet is believed to be from circa 1887. The steamer likely referred to the fire engine that the firemen owned, which was called the Lady Dufferin. These shoes were found in the walls of Quaker House during renovations in 1991. It's unclear whether they were originally included when the Ray family built the home, or whether they were included when additions were built onto the house by the Jackson family in the 1840s. There's an old tradition that's been identified in parts of England, Germany, and the New England states as well as Canada, where shoes were placed in the walls or ceilings of homes to stop evil spirits from entering. Generally, only one shoe out of a pair would be placed in the wall so that the spirit or devil could spend all of its time searching for the other shoe, rather than cause trouble for the owners of the home. The Dartmouth Ropework Company was founded by William James Stairs in the north end of Dartmouth in 1868. It will later be known as Consumer Cordage in 1892. The plant included a rope walk that was 2 stories high and 1,200 feet, about 366 meters long. It was the longest building in the province at the time it was built. The Star Manufacturing Company patented the Acme Club spring skate in 1864. It was designed by John Forbes. The skate was unique due to it having an adjustable clamp and spring that would allow for it to be securely fitted to a skater's boot without having to drill a hole in the bottom of the boot's heel or use leather straps that could break, as was common previously. This ingenuity in skate design is what put the company on the map as the manufacturer of ice skates. All hours for the houses and where you can find us can be found at www.dartmouthheritagemuseum.ns.ca. But be sure to follow our social media for updates on exhibits and scheduling. We hope to see you soon.